Dr. Phil just graduated from Colorado School of Mines with his PhD in metallurgical engineering.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you for the introduction. Today I'll be talking about the critical minerals as byproducts of production, and then Dr. Anderson will be talking about the criticality in intellectual capital after I wrap up. Let's see. Okay, a little bit of what I'll talk about today. First, I'll talk about what defines criticality, and this changes a little bit depending on where you look, but I'll define it based on the executive order that was published several years ago by President Trump. And then I'll talk about guidelines for the critical minerals list as they were decided on by the USGS. I'll talk about host elements, and then I'll talk about the difference between byproduct, co-product, and primary production, and what those all mean in terms of the critical minerals. And then I'll just go into a little bit about three of the selected critical minerals, some rare earth elements, talk about cobalt, and I'll talk a little bit about indium, just as three that are interesting to look at from a processing side. And then Dr. Anderson will wrap it up with the criticality. So what defines criticality? According to Executive Order number 13817, which was published in December of 2017, a non-fuel mineral or mineral material essential to the economic and national security of the U.S., the supply chain of which is vulnerable to disruption and that serves an essential function in the manufacturing of a product, the absence of which would have significant consequences for the economy and national security, is defined as a critical element. The figure that I have on the left here shows a visual representation of how to define mineral criticality. So if you have increasing supply risk going across on the bottom, on the x-axis, and the increasing impact of supply restriction up on the y-axis, an element that might be further into the top right corner, such as A in this case, will be more critical than a mineral with that is down in the bottom right corner, because the supply can be disrupted and the supply risk will then affect the rest of the economy. So guidelines for the critical minerals list, the figure that I have here in the main section of the screen, this is the list of 35 minerals and materials that were decided upon by USGS and others to be targeted as critical minerals through this executive order. I'll spare you reading through all of them, but the way that these were decided from the USGS side of things was minerals which exhibit a high Herfindahl-Hirschman index of greater than 2,500, and minerals with a high net import reliance of greater than 50. And then minerals were included based on one metric or the other, and some minerals also just because of their importance in the US economy. The Herfindahl-Hirschman index, in case you're not familiar with it, it's a way to calculate the competitiveness of a market. What you essentially do is take the individual market shares in percents for each of the different people that are, or I guess corporations that are, or countries in this case, taking part in the, taking part in this sector, and then you square those and you sum those all together, and so you get a range from 0 to 10,000. The lower the number, that means that you have multiple people that are taking part in this sector, and then you have a more competitive market. So minerals that have a high index might have only one or two major producers. And then an import reliance essentially is what percentage of that mineral or metal or whatever do we get from a different country, and how much of that supply that is used in the US needs to be imported from other countries. So host elements, this is a figure from Dr. Gradle, and it shows in the center, it shows the primary host elements, and then surrounding that, it shows the surrounding elements are positioned at a proportional position to the percentage of their production that is linked with that associated host element. So for example, if you look at the aluminum slice here, you see gallium is really close up to the aluminum, and that means that almost 100% of gallium is recovered as a byproduct or co-product with aluminum production. And this is just an easy way to kind of visualize which materials are closely bound together with other materials and where those sources may come from. I'll talk really quickly about byproduct versus co-product and versus primary production. So byproduct production is a minor material that is unable to make the project economic by itself. So if for some reason you were no longer able to recover the minor or the major product of this mine, then the byproduct would not be would not bring enough economic value in order to keep the process afloat. So it's really covered as a side project. A co-product, on the other hand, is a minor material which could make the project economic on its own, but is still recovered together with another product. And so in this case, if the primary product were to go away, you still have enough economic impact from this minor product in order to make the project viable. And then the primary production is just the primary material, which makes the entire project economic. So from that, I'll talk about the 3 different elements from the critical minerals list, and I'll just give a little bit of information about the import reliance, and then talk a little bit about how those different materials are processed. I'll start with the rare earth elements. Rare earth elements are currently mined as byproducts, co-products, and primary products all around the world. The US currently imports 80% of its rare earth element compounds and metals from China. 6% of those, and 6% of the import is from Estonia, and then 3% from Japan and Malaysia. And Japan and Malaysia gets a lot of their raw materials from places like Australia and so forth. The US is now, again, producing bastnasite concentrate out of Mountain Pass. In 2018, the United States produced 26,000 tons of a bastnasite concentrate from the mine in California. And this is different for a while. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. Mountain Pass, California has kind of gone offline, come back online, depending on different economic values and administrations that are taking over. On the left side, you can see the percentage of usage for rare earths right now. 62%, or this is as of 2013. These numbers are still fairly accurate for today's use. In fact, the catalyst sector of rare earths usage has gone up even higher. So the largest portion for rare earth usage is in the form of catalysts and petroleum refining or catalytic converters, or just in general chemical processing. You have some in metallurgy for hybrid vehicles and steel additives. And then another big sector for clean energy would be the use of rare earths in magnets for wind turbines and other clean energy uses. There's 2 primary minerals that I'll talk about today for rare earth elements. There are a couple of others as well, but these are the 2 largest sources, and so these are the ones that I'll talk about today. So first, bastnasite. It's a rare earth fluorocarbonate mineral. The largest producer of bastnasite is Bayan-Obo mine in China, which actually produces iron as a primary product. The bastnasite there is recovered as a concentrate from a product of the gravity separation plant before flotation extraction. Through the use of different magnetic separators and gravity separation, you're able to create enough of a bastnasite concentrate that they can recover bastnasite as a valuable mineral. The sole domestic producer of bastnasite, like I said, is Mountain Pass in California, and they produce bastnasite concentrate as a primary product. So without bastnasite concentrate, there is no other product at Mountain Pass. They have an average grade greater than 8% for their bastnasite concentrate, and they perform flotation before extraction. On the right side of the screen, I have a version of a bastnasite processing flow sheet, a block flow sheet, where you first have the ore, you then calcine the ore and do a hydrochloric acid leach in order to get those materials available, or sorry, you calcine to get the materials ready for acid leaching. You then filter, and then you add a caustic cracking step in order to remove the fluorides from this material. Fluorides are the biggest issue when it comes to processing bastnasite ores. And then you do an oxalate precipitation to precipitate the rare earths out. That can be then filtered, and then the following materials from that is to go into solvent extraction for separating the individual rare earths from one another. Monazite processing is another, monazite is another large rare earth element, and there is research going into domestic production of monazite. I just recently saw there's a news release from Energy Fuels Resources producing first pilot scale rare earth element carbonate concentrate from a North American monazite source. And there's 2 primary methods for processing monazite for processing monazite. There's a sulfuric acid bake method, and then a caustic crack method, which is the flow sheet, which I have here on the left side. In the caustic crack, you essentially leach or crack the phosphates off of the rare earth elements with concentrated caustic at high temperatures. that material is then washed, and then the rare earth hydroxides that are formed as a product of that reaction are then dissolved using hydrochloric acid, and then precipitated as carbonates, and then again recovered through solvent extraction in order to get each individual rare earth into its own metal phase. For cobalt, the US as of 2019 had a 78% net import reliance from Norway, 17%, Japan made up 13%, China with 11%, and Canada at 11%, and then other sources at 48% of the import for the United States. Cobalt is important for, again, for clean energy applications. Many people think about copper when you think about electric vehicles coming into the market and everything, but really you need a lot of cobalt in order to create the batteries and other chemical applications. And so here we see superalloys is the largest section of cobalt usage currently, and then chemical applications with 31%, metallic applications at 14%, and then cemented carbides with 9% of production. Cobalt processing, cobalt is produced as a primary product and a byproduct of other metals. The vast majority of cobalt resources are in sediment-hosted stratiform copper deposits in Congo and Zambia. These are actually the largest portion, and this is why cobalt is considered to be a critical material, because large portions of the reserves are in Congo, and it is not a extremely stable area to be sourcing materials from, and there's a lot of risk for supply disruption. Another source of cobalt resources are nickel-bearing laterite deposits in Australia and nearby island countries, magmatic nickel-copper sulfide deposits in mafic and ultramafic rocks in Australia, Canada, Russia, and the United States. And then there's always these deep sea nodules that are get looked at again periodically, found at the bottom of the ocean in the Atlantic, Indian, and Pacific Oceans. That could be a significant portion of cobalt reserves, but they're obviously very difficult to get to. The flow sheet I have here on the left side of the screen is a flow sheet that shows the recovery of cobalt from a nickel ore processing flow sheet. So that would be the nickel-bearing laterite deposits, where they're processed using a high-pressure acid leach. And then you have different steps that allow you to recover the cobalt separately from the nickel ore. Cobalt is also a byproduct of copper production. Here you have a flow sheet for cobalt recovery from copper. First, you have the milled ore concentrate that goes to a leaching phase, and then you have the copper recovery from that leaching phase, and the copper product is out. The tailings from that go on to neutralization and iron removal, and then you can remove other impurities such as iron, aluminum, manganese, some copper that may be left, zinc, lead, and so forth. And then you have a cobalt recovery section before you then go to the final section, which would be a nickel recovery section. Indium is primarily recovered as a byproduct of the zinc sulfide ore sphalerite. Indium in these deposits ranges anywhere from less than 1 part per million to around 100 parts per million. The US currently has a 100% net import reliance for indium. That means that no indium is currently being produced here in the United States. And that makes it a critical material, because if there were to be issues, issues that prevented us from importing indium, then it would no longer be available for our use. The import sources are 36% from China, 22% from Canada, 11% from the Republic of Korea, 7% from Taiwan, and then 24% from other sources. The largest use for indium currently is in flat panel displays, but it's also used in solders, photovoltaics, and batteries, and other clean energy applications as well. And here there's a flow sheet showing indium recovery from zinc ore. First you have a zinc concentrate. It's roasted, calcined, and leached, and then those pregnant solution is purified, and that's where the indium is removed from this section. You have the solid residues where the indium can then be leached and then combined with dust from copper smelting in order to increase the amount of indium that is recovered from zinc ore. And I'd like to acknowledge the support of the Critical Materials Institute for some of this work. And then I have this figure here that shows countries from major import sources for which the United States was greater than 50% net import reliant. And it shows the number of commodities which the US and where those materials are concentrated. So the biggest one, obviously, here is China in the red. That is the largest single place where the United States imports mineral resources from, and then next in the list is Canada. But that shows that it really is important that we need to concentrate and find ways to produce these critical materials from either byproduct or co-product productions if we don't have primary production here in the United States. And with that, I'd like to pass it on to Dr. Anderson.
Thank you for this opportunity. Betty called us a couple of weeks ago and asked us to speak, so you're getting both of us here. And I think this presentation and the fact that Phil, who is a new PhD, and myself, who's an old PhD, are doing this, kind of brings up this point. And Phil just said, you know, we want to overcome our reliance on these critical materials from other countries. And that's great, because the United States does have abundant resources of many things we need. Unfortunately, we no longer have abundance of intellectual capital. So I'm going to be a whiny professor and talk to you about that. You know, here's my philosophy, but it was hard to beat Phil. So, you know, I put everything. I originally gave it the SME Thrive, or at least part of it. But I read Dilbert every day, so you may enjoy Dilbert. Excellent presentation, but you may not think so. Anyway, a quote from Plato: "Necessity, who is the mother of our invention." And indeed, if you look upon creativity or breakthroughs in mineral processing, extractive metallurgy, they were usually created from some pressing need, and quite often they wound up creating something else. That's a whole different topic, but how do we do that? Well, we had, and I won't go through every detail, we had the Bronze Age, and of course pure copper and bronze and alloy copper and tin were used indiscriminately, and then the Copper Age occurred around 4000 BC. So with the development and understanding of metals and materials, or nowadays critical materials, entire civilizations as we know them were shaped, right? So we saw operations of mining, smelting, and casting, specialization of labor, and the search for raw materials stimulated exploration. Then we had the Iron Age, which you could argue we're still in. It's an indispensable metal and material for building our society. But this developed economic innovations, the Bronze Age, and laid foundations for a feudal organization. We just went through elections, so you may argue we still have feudal organizations. But many of the things, Phoenician script became widespread, alphabetic writing. So civilization as we know it was created through the advancement and understanding of how to produce and use metals. Now, both Phil and I are members of the Kroll Institute for Extractive Metallurgy, and this was created in part when Dr. Kroll invented the Kroll process for titanium and zirconium. After a few patent battles, he gave back and helped create, after he died, the 1974, the Kroll Institute for Extractive Metallurgy at the Colorado School of Mines. And so this quote, you can take it for what it is: "Good metallurgists are not born. They're made with the ample money of companies which hire them. And since they usually make their mistakes on a grand scale, they are the nightmares of business management. So treat us nice. But back in the day in the Kroll Institute, there used to be a Kroll medallion given out. So here you see Herman Rickover being given the first one. Excuse me, this is Herman Rickover, I'm sorry. And this is being given by Dr. Schlichten. And so for over 45 years now, Kroll has provided support for undergraduate and graduate students in extractive metallurgy and mineral processing. And you say, great, what's the problem? Well, I'll try and give it. And I'm half Irish, and one of my favorite poets, of course, is Yeats. And this is from the Isle of Innisfree. So if you were home with COVID and you want to read some poetry, try a little Yeats. Anyway, innovation in mineral processing, extractive metallurgy had significant impacts on humanity. Created the Iron and Bronze Age as we know it, Dr. Kroll created new materials, new industries with his innovation, aluminum titanium. And we'll see, or we have seen, that oftentimes innovations were created for a need, but actually found use in other ways. Copper electrorefining was one of those. And people willing to put perspiration in their effort, overcome failures, and accept challenges, right? But so how do we continue to do this? And particularly with this need for critical materials and critical minerals, how do we keep doing it? Well, I like to show this one because I became a professor 11 years ago, and I always get interesting questions. People say, why would you be a professor? Well, I'm a professor because primarily to be around young people like Phil or otherwise who mentor them and help them to become good engineers. People say, why do you do research? You know, well, you're not going to stay at a university very long if you don't. And then oftentimes they say, oh, you now retired. You retire. Well, anybody who's worked as a full professor and cares about it, it's a little bit more than retirement. And then my classic is, what do you do with your summers off? I don't know. When I get one, I'll let you know. So this is a church. My ancestors on the Irish side are from the Barrow Peninsula. They were copper miners. Most of them left in 1873. This church was built in 1907, and it's huge. How did that happen? Well, it happened because the people who went to Butte, America, where I'm sitting today, didn't forget, and they gave back. And so this nice quote from Pablo Picasso, meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away. So that's why you become a professor, okay? So Kroll, again, this is a picture outside Dr. Taylor's office. He's the director of our Kroll Institute, and he's both an advocate for metallurgical education and a philanthropist. So I throw this up, and you may say what? You're getting religious on it? But if you look, if you can see it, I got my pinky ring on today, and I used to give this poem. It was written by Rudyard Kipling for the Order of the Engineer ceremony. And it was written by Kipling, who admired engineers, and it's inspired by the story of Jesus visiting Martha and Mary. And Martha was the very pragmatic one who ran around taking care of Jesus, while Mary sat and listened to Jesus, and Jesus got mad and chastised Martha for not thinking about the future. And so all of Martha's sons were cursed from thenceforth to be engineers. So here is a poem or a part of that, and you'll see from a very popular TV show, The Big Bang Theory, and this is leaving somewhere. Here is Sheldon, who is certainly a son of Mary. He's a physicist. And here's Howard, certainly a son of Martha. He's an engineer. And so the sons of Mary smile and are blessed. They know the angels are on their side. They know in them is the grace confessed, for their mercies multiplied. They sit at the feet, they hear their word. See how truly the promise runs. They have cast their burden upon the Lord, and he lays it upon Martha's sons, or the engineers. So what's the problem? Well, here's the critical problem. There's about 8 schools left that teach and research mineral processing, and about 5 that teach and research anti-extractive metallurgy. And I'm 64 years old. Phil is about 40 years younger than me. I am the last mineral processing and extractive metallurgy tenure track faculty member that's been hired at the Colorado School of Mines. And that was 11 years ago in August 2009. Back in the day, we used to have a distinct degree in mineral processing and extractive metallurgy. It no longer exists in North America. The average age of faculty, if you can find them, is well over 50. And when you're in a university system, as I am, an H index, which is how many citations you have, is more important for hiring, tenure, and promotion than any real-world practical engineering, okay? So we have a criticality problem. The Bureau of Mines no longer exists. It exited in 1995. So unlike agricultural or health or other parts of our society, we really have no true representation of our industry at the federal level. And even though we have a very large GDP in the United States for mining and metallurgy. The majority of the Western world is done by the METS sector, which is the service providers. Corporate research and development, as we used to know it, barely exists. And over half or more of the experienced mineral and metallurgical engineers are going to retire in 10 years. So if you want to create critical metals, critical materials, new processes, we have a demographic issue, and it's getting worse. And as an analogy, so are you going to go hire a plumber if you need an electrician? All right. Okay. Now, what's going on in the rest of the world? Well, I'm also a visiting professor, faculty at Central South University. I was there a year ago, and they're very nice to me. It is the largest of 38 mineral processing schools in China, not extractive, mineral processing, separate. They have 1,000 undergraduates and 500 graduate students studying exclusively mineral processing engineering. Extractive metallurgy is there too, but it's an equally large but separate school, okay? So we say that we want to regain our control of critical minerals and critical metals and do this at home. Well, where are the qualified people that are going to do it? So, you know, as an indication, Phil talked about rare earths. They're not rare. They're actually a byproduct of iron obo. But in the United States, mineral processing, extractive metallurgy are very rare. It's difficult to find it, and it's disappearing. And the Chinese now control what the USA created in rare earths, and they control mineral processing, extractive metallurgy, education, and research. So, you know, our growing population needs a vast amount of skilled mineral and metallurgical engineering professionals. Who's going to be doing this, particularly in the United States, 20 years from now? I won't be. And who's going to provide these increasing minerals and metals and innovations, right? Who's going to create the entirely new metal industries like Kroll did, that unfortunately a lot of we've given away? And who's going to do an enduring educational research legacy like Kroll? So we try and keep it going at the Colorado School of Mines. This is a little older picture. I'm sure Phil is in here somewhere. And this is our research group. But, and there's a quote from Dr. Kroll: "I'm happy that the gracious fate allowed me to carry for a while the flag of rare metals research, which many young people have now gathered to carry on where I've left off." Now, take this picture and surround it with 1,000 Chinese undergraduates and 500 graduate students from Central South University, and then multiply it by 38, and then by 2 to include the extractive metallurgists. You get in a criticality issue. So we keep chugging on. I like to show this one from Winston Churchill: "Success is going from failure to failure without a loss of enthusiasm." And we'll keep going. So anyway, privileged to present this part. I'm glad Phil and I were able to tag it and talk about criticality from 2 different ways. Thank you for, in part, DOE CMI for helping us out on all this work. And I think Phil and I would be happy to take some questions. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Betty, do you want to see if there's any chat? I don't see any Q&A.
Yeah, I don't see any questions or.
Oh boy, you put them all asleep.
Yeah, I think what I would ask though is about the criticality and professionals to teach is what do you see or what do you think could be done to help the U.S. be more active in metallurgical, yeah, and in the metallurgical education?
Well, you have to create an aptitude for it to exist, okay? And that comes both from the universities and colleges making it important that it happen. And it also comes, in the United States anyway, from the industries stepping up and saying we need this, and the industries opening up a checkbook. Because at the end of the day, I put up the little slide of the church and all this do good, but And I do that. But universities and colleges are businesses, okay? And they serve a sector of our society just like any other service industry. And so there has to be at the end of the day, a financial region or otherwise to have a program like this, or it doesn't exist. And these programs in the United States are going away. And even if you keep them, finding the faculty members to populate them is going to be even more difficult. And you can say, and my undergrad degree is in chemical, and well, you can train chemical engineers. Okay, who's going to train them? Who's going to be around? So it's a critical issue. And I know I sound like a whiny professor, but I'm just saying, we're in a competitive landscape. The Chinese are very proactive when it comes to this sector. And so they're creating the critical intellectual capital, and they're also, to their credit, going out and taking a long-term vision and a long-term stance and gobbling up the critical resources, right? So there you are.
And we do have a couple of questions and comments now. One is from Mark Barron in South Dakota. He says, wow, you've pointed out the problem. What is the solution? And I think you've talked about that a little bit, but do you have any ideas about how to go further?
Well, Phil is a prime example of a very key component. The Critical Materials Institute was created 8 years ago through the DOE, and all of Phil's graduate school, he did research projects on critical materials and earned his PhD. And so without their support, which is coming through the DOE and the U.S. government, he wouldn't have a PhD in metallurgical engineering. So that's one way. But like I said, there also has to be an aptitude within a university and college to say, yeah, we want to do this and sustain it. And then the industry, not that any number of industries don't support, but they really need to be, in the United States, they got to be proactive. Because unlike Canada and Australia, which are also suffering, by the way, the governments there do provide incentives for industry to engage with colleges and universities, at least in a research sense, right? They have matching or things like this. But those are the things. There has to be an understanding that there's a problem and a willingness to engage to fix it. There is some of that, like I said, through DOE CMI and at Colorado School of Mines. Some companies, Newmont and Freeport, have stepped up to a degree, but it's not getting better. I'm just telling you. I know you sound like a whiny professor. When I got to the Kroll Institute, we had 5 faculty. Now we have 2. We're not allowed to hire anybody at all. I'm the last one that was hired 11 years ago. That's it.
We have a question that's related to that, and it's from Bruce Moyer. He says, industry must create a demand for a workforce that then generates the population of students wanting to major in mineral processing and extraction. Is there a big enough industry in the USA to create this demand? And I think you partially answered that. Do you have any more comments in that area?
Well, Bruce, thanks for your question and thanks for your support. There are currently, now Phil is in transition right now, but it won't be long. There are currently, if you talk about Australia, you talk about Canada, you talk about the United States, there is not enough metallurgical or mineral processing talent to go around. And when I say that, I'm including both the primary and secondary industries, okay? My last 2 master's students both went to work. One is in platinum catalyst recycling, and the other one just joined a lead acid battery recycling company. So these skills are in demand across a lot of sectors. So, Bruce, there's no shortage of jobs in Canada, in Australia, in the United States for people with these skill sets. Good question, though.
Okay,
And thanks for your support.
Audrey is asking about, is Western Europe sleeping on the wheel as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Even worse, the Camborne School of Mines is under scrutiny. Their mining engineering program has been suspended. They're not taking any new students. Their mineral processing program, that's kind of part of that, has come and gone for years. My son was fortunate in his master's degree to be in a European program, and one of his degrees he earned was the Camborne School of Mines. The program, it's part of a larger university called Exeter, and the campus actually, their focus is liberal arts, but Camborne School of Mines is located on it now. And so they're constantly under the gun, constantly under scrutiny. I don't know if they're doing anything in mineral processing anymore. It kind of comes and goes. So yeah, Western Europe, same thing.
Okay, Walter Weinig says, where are the metallurgists entering industry today outside China coming from? Seems like I see more coming from chemical process engineering.
You'll see some chemical engineers. That's very true. You know, there are Chinese. I mean, one of my PhD students, Hao Sui, who's a wonderful guy, he went to work for my son at Nevada Gold Mines, and he's there now. But if you look at where we're at now and where we're going to be 10 to 20 years from now, the demand is there and the opportunities are tremendous. I'm just saying. You know, my son's a metallurgical superintendent for Nevada Gold Mines, age 34. When I was 34, that wouldn't have happened. And that's nothing against my son. But that just says, oh, you can move up the ranks pretty quick and take up a lot of responsibility. Okay, so yeah. So it's an interesting disconnect. Yeah.
And Carpenter says, in order to outcompete the Chinese, shouldn't we be mirroring what they are doing? Their government provides incentives to capture students, research, etc.
Well, we did. We used to have a Bureau of Mines. One of the questions you're pouring in now. Yeah, we used to have a Bureau of Mines that represented the interests of the mining and metallurgical industry, and some good things came out of it. The Kroll process was in collaboration with the Bureau of Mines, created a whole new industry. They, for all of their bureaucratic nuances that may have put them away 25 years ago, they did have a long history of success and creating things. Yeah, I think we need to get behind this. The Chinese certainly have invested a lot into this sector and several others. So good question. Phil, you're not getting any questions here. You should answer.
Okay, Antonio Pucci says, how to use looming circular economy emergence with respect to leverage the wealth of already mined tailings facilities present and past, which do content these elements, and how to make it economically viable.
I'll let you handle that, Phil.
Oh, I don't really even know what to say. I know there's a lot of research going into sort of recovering minerals from tailings projects. It's just a lot of times those projects really struggle with economic viability. And that's part of your question, is how to make it economically viable. And I don't know if I have an answer for that. I think it depends on way too many factors for me to say one thing that could get it there. I don't know, Corby, if you have any.
Well, people, depending on the nature of the materials and where they sit, people have taken a look, and of course that just comes down to oftentimes what we call an ore, and sometimes the tailings, because of economics, can become an ore. So yeah, interesting.
I mean, I would say from a minerals point of view, to an extent, there's also an issue with processing capabilities in the U.S. For example, with rare earths, I know the U.S. produces concentrates, but we don't have any facilities here to actually produce the downstream products from those concentrates. So those concentrates that are being mined at Mountain Pass right now are still being shipped overseas for processing.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe there needs to be more investment into the downstream processing side of these different commodities.
And we do have a student. He's finished his master's. He's going to work on a PhD. And somebody's got a question here I see coming up about La Jolla. Actually, we have a nice collaboration with university in Peru right now, and Michael Kaplan is going to work on some of these waste materials from Peru in a collaboration there. So I did my master's degree on smelter flue dust. So I mean, I've worked on on waste myself. So anyway, what do I got here?
Yeah, Bill Wilson is asking about collaboration with Canadians.
Sure. Although the Canadian landscape is just about the same as the U.S. landscape, right? You know, I think the Haileybury School of Mines is shut down. In Kingston, there is Queen's University. They do some things. UBC has mineral processing as part of mining. They have a hydrometallurgy group that's part of materials. Then you can go, you know, they're kind of disparate like we are. You get into Alberta and you've got some groups that are beneficiating coal products, if you want, or not coal, but oil sands products. So sure, we could collaborate with them. They're aligned a little bit differently than we are, but you know, that's kind of like getting all the settlers that are left together and surrounding the wagons and hope you survive, right? I mean, we need some more substantial, I don't know how to describe it, support or active engagement, I think, but that's just my opinion. So, good question, Bill.
Do you think there's any anything that can be done politically about more support for the mining industry based on the renewable energy things that are coming up?
Yeah, that might be. Well, this is you know, this is where DOE CMI has played a big role, because they're all about energy critical minerals. And you know, in the landscape of things over the last 8 years, it's been a huge benefit for the supply side of the industry, you know. But when you step outside of the DOE CMI support system, there's not much there, you know. In our society, sadly, we believe everything. I mean, I'm speaking to the choir. We believe everything comes off a shelf, right? So we don't understand how things, where we used to, where things come from. And I think that's part of the psyche we have to somehow overcome. And I know, Betty, you and I, in the great snowstorm of 2010, went back to Washington and lobbied about the fact that all of this renewable energy has to come from somewhere, and it's going to require more materials and metals, right? So, yeah, I think that's one way to do it.
Corby, do you want to? There's a bunch of other comments. Also, in the chat. Also, I want to let you know that these comments or the chat will also be put on the website along with the recording of this webinar. So some of these are extensive, so I don't want to read them.
I can't think of a better American School of Metallurgy than the La Jolla Metallurgical Complex. If you take, you know, if you set aside any of the environmental or other issues that you know are going on, The unit operations and flow sheets there are freaking amazing, and what people did there. And one of my friends and colleagues, a lot of us know Len Harris, he used to manage that place. And when you start taking a deep dive on what was treated there and how they did it, it was amazing. So sure, let's I mean, that'd be a great training school if we could do it. I think it's about 15,000 feet, but it's all right. Phoenix tailings. Oh, okay. Huh. All right. I don't know, Nick, about Phoenix tailings, but.
There's a question from Paul Hampton saying, what is the best strategy for processing rare earths? And it seems that companies are basing economics on 20 products. Is that practical? I mean, from my experience in the sector, I'd say the problem with rare earths is that a lot of times you have really large portions of cerium and lanthanum, and there's not large markets for those materials, and it really hurts the economics from that point of view. And so I know part of CMI is doing a lot of research into creating new alternatives for cerium, for like cerium aluminum alloys that can be used in different ways in current aluminum alloys. And if you can increase the markets for those metals that aren't currently really used, or sometimes even just tossed aside, it can make the whole economics for rare earths processing a lot more favorable as well.
I've been looking at the chat and I see there's question and answers over here. So, oh, Brent Carlson's on there. Hello, Brent. Any advice for an incoming faculty member? Publish a lot of papers. And, you know, be active on your research proposals. Bruce Moore, confused. Why aren't there students with wallets out to pay tuition? Oh, that's a good question. Good question, Bruce. I think it's in the STEM banquet, okay, of choices for people who might be interested in engineering or science. Either the mining industry or mineral processing, extractive metallurgy are not as, how would you call popular, if you want to call it that, as other things like maybe biomedical or who knows, right? And so students either have a interest at a young age in some of these other things, which is fine, or maybe some of these other things like mineral processing and metallurgical and extractive metallurgy are not of interest or not well advertised. So that's a good question.
I can chip in on that because I did my undergraduate in mining engineering at Virginia Tech, and when I was touring Virginia Tech, I was actually intending to go there as a mechanical engineer, but I went to one of the mining sessions, and they did a really good job of advertising the mining program. So maybe it's a combination of that, but also I think the mining industry in the U.S. To some extent has a really bad reputation, and I think there could be work done in order to increase the social license for the mining industry and mineral processing in order to get more students interested in the field as well, like doctors and physicists and etc.
Yeah, Paul, I see that Paul and I graduated from the College of Mines and Earth Resources, University of Idaho, which no longer exists. So good to see you, Paul. Let's see.
There's Miranda Hendricks, Corby.
Oh,
which countries would you say are modeling an effort similar to China?
Ooh. I can't think of any one country that is doing anything like that on that scale. Now, I've been to South America, and I know our friends in Peru, we're going to be collaborating with them on augmenting what they do. And I've been to Chile several times. They have a number of mining schools, and a lot of their graduates get exported because there's such a lack. But I can't think of any country that has made such a focused effort to capture critical resources and create critical intellectual capacity as the Chinese. It's a very, when I was at Central South University, we did a review of their programs last year. They were building an entirely new campus. They were building an entirely new medical school. And when we got done reviewing their programs, there was like 6 of us there. This guy who was the dean of the medical school came over, saw our presentation. He goes, "Well, this is great. We appreciate it. By the way, if any of you would like a job, we'll hire you tomorrow at above your current salary, and we'd be happy to have you join us." And we're all going, "Say what?" Yeah, no lie. It's like, what the hell? So I can't think of anybody quite making that much effort. And there's obviously the Chinese value resources, right? So they're going after it, right, wrong, and indifferent.
And Mark Bowron has a comment from the mineral econ perspective. As soon as the U.S. invests in domestic capacity or processing, the Chinese cut the price or subsidize it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's very, very insightful, because these, particularly getting into these minor metals or these, I don't know, we call them critical materials now. It's a very subliminal, not transparent market, and things can be manipulated either by what you say or even in what quoted prices are and the reality thereof. So yeah, it's a very competitive and non-transparent industry, particularly the primary side. So yeah, I don't know.
There's a bunch more comments.
Oh God.
We're kind of getting close to our hour. Or is there anything in particular you'd like to address before we shut down?
There's a bunch of them here. I can't keep up with all.
Yeah, I think one thing that we could do, Corby, is we'll save all of these chat messages, and then I can send them to you and Phil, and
sure,
and you would be welcome to make additional comments to each of these, and then we'll get them sent out to our mailing list.
Okay. Great. Well, like I said, I appreciate it. And I know Phil does, and at some point, and I see Brett's on there too. I'll be passing the torch to you guys, but probably not another 10 years.
Okay. Well, I want to thank Corby and Phil so much for putting this together on such short notice. We really appreciate it, and we'll be getting the recording put up on our website, and also we'll expand on the chat and the questions. So Susan, do you want to close it up?
Yes, I want to thank everybody for attending, and also we will probably be doing more of these in the coming year, so keep your eyes open, and we'll be sending out more notices. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
I like Paul Hampton's last comment: engineers never retire, we just go on contract. Boy, that's about true.
They're gonna need us, Paul.
Yeah, I know a lot of engineers in their 80s still going strong.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I want to appreciate everybody who showed up. It's been great, and we'll have some more of these.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, everybody.
All the best.